Good evening. This is Making the Case. I'm your host, Yorit Walde. We start tonight with a case out of Kenosha, Wisconsin. Crystal Kaiser, a 20-year-old sex trafficking survivor, is facing life in prison after being charged with the murder of her abuser. Crystal, who is black, was just 16 when she met Randy Voller, a 33-year-old white man. Voller sexually abused Crystal and nearly a dozen other black girls as young as 12 over the course of more than a year. In February of 2018, police arrested Voller on multiple charges, including child sexual assault, but prosecutors released him without bail the same day. 3 months later, Crystal killed him, she says, in self-defense after he raped her. She spent nearly 2 years behind bars before being released on bond last June. Joining me now is the Washington Post reporter who first broke Crystal's story, Jessica Contreras. We are so appreciative of you being here tonight. Jessica, thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for bringing attention to this story.
Yeah, no, of course, likewise. So how did you first become involved with Crystal's case?
In 2019, I was wanting to understand more about sex trafficking in America, and I learned about a phrase that is used that's called the criminalization of sex trafficking survivors. And I didn't really know what that meant at first, but I learned that many kids who have been sex trafficked end up involved in some serious crimes. And the whole criminal justice system is looking at this question, which is when a kid is involved in a serious crime and then police, prosecutors, judges find out that they were being sex trafficked at the time, they are debating what should be done about that. And that's what Crystal's case is all about. So I learned a little bit about Crystal through some local news clips, reached out to her attorney, reached out to her mom, and then ended up corresponding with her while she was in jail. We were writing to each other and talking to each other on video, and that's how I came to understand what she had been through.
Now, Jessica, prosecutors knew that Randy Voller was sexually abusing multiple underage black girls, one of them as young as 12. Authorities had video evidence of this abuse. He was charged with child sexual assault, but despite all of that, he was released the same day without bail. But Crystal remained behind bars for 2 years before a bond organization, a bond fund, paid for her $400,000 bail. How have police and prosecutors been able to justify their poor decision making there?
I'm really glad you asked that question because that information wasn't public until we started looking at these records. They at first were not releasing any information about the investigation into Randy Voller. And it was only after Crystal herself was able to look at some of those records and her family shared them with me that we were able to see that police were investigating this man for an extended period of months. And when I talked to the prosecutors about that, they tried to explain their side of things. And what they said was, they were taking it very seriously, that they were investigating, but they couldn't know for sure how old the people in the videos were. But the police reports contradict that. The police reports show that the investigators believed that those girls appeared to be as young as 12, that there were multiple videos involving these girls, and one of those girls was Crystal.
And when you're investigating a crime as serious as sexual assault of minors, you give someone a bond, at the very least. So now an appellate court ruled last week that Crystal can use a state law that essentially allows trafficking victims in affirmative defense if they can show that their actions were a direct result of the trafficking they experienced. So how significant is this decision for Crystal's case and for similar cases ahead?
This is really big. This law, the affirmative defense in Wisconsin, has never really been used in a case like this before. And so what Crystal is trying to get the opportunity to do is to show a judge and then possibly a jury that what she did was related to and was, as the law says, a direct result of the abuse that she experienced. A judge in Kenosha said that that law that was written by trafficking advocates to help girls like Crystal Crystal did not apply in Crystal's case, that she could not use that. So her team did what's called an interlocutory appeal. They put her case on pause. They went to this appeals court. They've been waiting for over a year for a decision, and the ruling was very clear. Crystal is entitled to show a judge this evidence. If a judge agrees that there is some evidence that her crime was a direct result of the trafficking she experienced, she then gets to show that evidence potentially to a jury. And if a jury agrees, then Crystal could be found not guilty.
Now, Crystal's being prosecuted by the Kenosha, Wisconsin DA, Michael Gravely, the same DA who refused to prosecute the police officer who shot Jacob Blake several times in the back. But he's also prosecuting Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old white kid who crossed state lines with a gun, who shot and killed 2 people and wounded a third at a protest against the shooting of Jacob Blake. How do you see the racial dynamics playing out in this case?
It's really important to note that these major decision makers in Crystal's case, just like in the cases of girls like her across the country who are frequently Black and brown girls, the decision makers are white people and white men who are looking at her and making decisions based on how they're judging her. And we know that happened in her case. We can see the way that plays out in these other cases that you mentioned. And it also is, we can see it in the way the world supporters respond to these cases. So it's been interesting to watch the prosecutor, DA Gravely, respond to each of these incidents. He repeatedly says that he will not be influenced by social media and things like that. And so while there have been many supporters and petitioners who have come out to ask him to drop the charges against Crystal, he has not done that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, Centoya Brown was one of many people who spoke up in support of Crystal, even drawing comparisons with her own case. Now, you write a lot about sex trafficking cases. What does this case and others like it tell us about sex trafficking in the U.S. today?
Thanks for asking that. What Centoya talks about, what Crystal has talked about, what Alexis Martin in Ohio has talked about is wanting people to understand how they ended up in that situation in the first place. I think we all like to think that could never happen to our own kids, our own friends. But the reality is that sex trafficking is not something that happens when someone is kidnapped from a parking lot. The reality is that in our country, kids and adults too are wooed by someone they trust when they're in a situation that makes them vulnerable. Maybe they're experiencing homelessness. Maybe they're in the foster care system. They have these vulnerabilities that traffickers look for and prey on to give them that love and support that they're looking for, and then turn that on them and begin to abuse them. In Crystal's case, she was a kid experiencing homelessness. Her family had just moved, escaping a domestic violence situation, and she told me that the reason why she started to get involved in the sale of sex was because she needed money for school supplies. So I think that echoes what was going on in Centoya's life and Alexis's life. These are kids in really difficult situations, and that's where we need to be looking for warning signs of sex trafficking.
Now, tell us about the Free Crystal online petition. Last time I checked, it had over 1.4 million signatures. What does all that support for Crystal tell you about where we are as a society on these issues?
I think it shows that we're starting to broaden our understanding of what a victim looks like. We used to see in advertisements, in movies, only pictures of white girls in chains locked in basements, and that was what we thought that sex trafficking looks like. But very often it looks like Crystal. It looks like a kid in a very difficult situation who was, as she says, defending herself. And that, while she has said again and again how sorry she is for what she did, she is also a victim too. And I think, regardless of the specifics of her case or the specifics of any of these cases, it is so important that we start seeing these Black and brown girls for the survivors that they are, and for the complicated situations that they are in, recognizing those, pausing, understanding what's going on there, and looking at the question that we started this conversation with. What does it mean when a child was being sex trafficked, when they committed that crime? What laws, what policies, what practices do we want in this country to address those issues?
Washington Post reporter Jessica Contreras, thank you so much for your incredible work and insight. Thank you again.